don't think I was prepared, I have to say, David. I mean, it was really hard. I was taken straight into the midst of people's lives that were so traumatized and chaotic. And I come from a kind of middle class background. I put my hand up and say, this was not my world. And it really opened my eyes, I think, and humbled me to see how people supported one another and survived with such trauma and chaos surrounding them.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
Today's guest is Karen Stallard. After starting her career as an actor, Karen became a member of the clergy before training as an art psychotherapist. Karen also founded the Geoff Ashcroft Community in Tower Hamlets, which is a specialist mental health project, and she's been a board member for various charities, including Crossroads Counselling Service, Margin's Homelessness Project, and the Union Chapel Project. She's also chair for a biannual conference, Continuing the Journey, which provides training to therapists and spiritual leaders. She's the director for Child Counselling Skills Certificate at Institute for Arts in Therapy and Education, and she's also and usually the designer of 20 Dreams, a game that promotes creative and emotional intelligence. Really pleased to have Karen on today. I've known Karen for many years, and it's really nice to get to have a more formal conversation with you.
Oh, it's lovely to be invited. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, fascinating podcasts that you have with amazing range of speakers, so it's a real privilege to be here today and to have a chat about stuff.
Hi Karen, really nice to meet you, and a fascinating CV you've got there. Looking forward to hearing a bit more about it. So before you trained as an art therapist, Karen, you were a Baptist minister, as I understand it. Can you tell us a little bit about how this role prepared you for working more directly within mental health?
I could speak for hours, David, on this. I mean, I grew up in the Baptist church, and so my experience of church has been a mixture of just amazing kind of support for people with mental health, but also a kind of horrific view of how untrained and how the church in general really doesn't know what it's doing with people with severe mental health issues as well. So yeah, as I grew up in my Baptist church, I had a close family member who suffered from psychosis, and I witnessed the church just not knowing what to do with this person who was coming along to church and expressing all sorts of strange behaviours and views. And so that there was that side of it where I was sort of despairing, thinking surely we should be progressive and we should be knowing our stuff with this, not trying to cast out demons and telling people that they're depressed it's because they've done something wrong, that sort of really old school stuff. So there's that part of it which sparked my interest, because I thought, as people of faith, we should be ones, leading the way in terms of how to be community for these people. So there was that side of it, but also I realised that churches provided sanctuary, for want of a better word, for people with mental health issues, because the communities were open for anyone to wander in and have a chat, and that sense of inclusiveness and welcome, which actually many churches do have, contrary to what popular belief is, provides a way in which somebody who's very isolated in the world to feel like they belong and can be a part of. And also, recognition that rituals and ancient scriptures and all of that kind of side of things is incredibly therapeutic for somebody who needs to regulate. And so the church, for me, I found personally, the church provided a space where I could deal with my trauma through meditation, prayer, ritual, and that was super helpful. So yeah, so my experience within the church and as a Baptist minister was one of thinking, well, the church could be a really wonderful place. However, sometimes it's not. So yeah, that was the beginning of my journey in exploring mental health and spirituality.
Did you develop those initiatives yourself, or was it something that the church encouraged you to do?
I think it was my own self-interest really that started off my work. I was working in Tower Hamlets at the time, but the church was encouraging it. So it was because I was working particularly for a church that was looking at new ways of being church and trying to be more culturally contextual and all of that kind of stuff. So the church kind of said, yeah, go for it. This sounds really interesting. And so I immersed myself into the kind of world of the mental health provision in Tower Hamlets. I got a job for the East London and City Mental Health Trust as a spiritual and cultural care coordinator. And I just got to know people in the community who were struggling with their mental health. And in that, we decided that the thing that was really missing, I suppose, for them was a safe community space that would accept them, even when they were really not very well at all, that would allow them to come in and do activities and eat with other people and make conversations and allow people to be where they're at. Yeah, so it was a kind of, the church, it was a bit of a new initiative, I think, which I was driving, partly out of desperation, because I was realizing that some of the more mainstream churches, these people just couldn't stay in them. You know, they were being ostracized again because perhaps their behavior was not acceptable or something like that. So it was a real drive to try and find a space that was safe, felt safe, and allowed people to come and go as they wanted, and be in a community, as it were.
So I've worked in East London myself. I worked in Homerton, which I suppose is adjacent to Tower Hamlets, isn't it?
Mm.
I remember it as being a very challenging area, particularly if you worked in the community like you're describing. So what was it in your background that prepared you for that kind of work?
So I don't think I was prepared. I think I was very ill-equipped, and I started off working in a way that was very unbounded, really, and quite unsafe for my own mental health. And it led me down a path of really reflecting and considering what training do we need, or does the church need, in order to be able to work with folk who live on the edges, I suppose, of our communities and struggle to find a place in them. And yeah, I suppose my upbringing did prepare me in a way, in that I had a mother who suffered from quite severe depression at times, and my other family member who was very severely ill and got quite psychotic at times. So in that sense, my childhood experience gave me my own training, but otherwise I was totally ill-equipped, and it's something that I feel very passionate about now, that we need our community workers to particularly be trained in trauma awareness, if they want to reach out and to be able to be in relationship with folk that are really struggling. They need to know their stuff, really, in order to be able to self-regulate and cope with it all themselves.
It seems like religious ministers often end up plugging the gaps of formal services, don't they? And certainly we did a podcast previously Michael Hasler and Byron Johnson, where they were talking about all the work that religious ministers do in prison and how they end up supporting quite vulnerable people. But you're right, if there isn't the training on trauma and mental health, there's a danger that people are then overwhelmed and flooded with distress that they're not equipped to manage.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely my experience of workers in church getting burnt out very quickly, not knowing what to do with the material that the people coming through their doors was presenting them, and also not knowing how to keep themselves safe, from aggression and violence and behaviour that was quite threatening at times. And I think my experience when I worked in Tower Hamlets was very much of being immersed in this, experiencing, people, banging on my window at night and stuff like that. And I thought, this is crazy. What are we doing here? How can we continue to work in a way that feels safe for everybody and stops the person who's perhaps behaving chaotically from being ostracized from the community because of that? And that's really why we set up the Geoff Ashcroft Community, to create a boundaried, safe space where people came at a certain time, left at a certain time. There were rules, there were kind of agreed community ways of being, and it was a sense of there was no one leading this thing. It was the whole community made the decisions as to what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. And and that took some consideration as to how we manage and deal with sort of some of the face-offs that we used to have. And we were working with ex-offenders, people with terrible childhood experiences that they carried into their adulthood, and many addicts of varying degrees. So we had a kind of works coming into the community, and it was wonderful once we'd set it up. And there were things we did which meant it felt very boundaried and controlled. And using the arts was incredibly important in that, because it gave people an activity and something that could help regulate them and calm them down and give them something to do. They didn't have to talk. It was having art activities was a key ingredient in that. Don't know whether that answered your question.
Well, yeah, partly, but there's a lot more to say. I think there's so much already in what you've said, because you've developed so many initiatives. I'm fascinated in this idea of lack of boundaries and its possible connection with creativity. And then you're kind of suggesting that the Geoff Ashcroft Community developed out of a kind of unbounded condition. I'd be interested to hear what you can say about that a bit more.
Yeah, so I was working for a kind of church organisation that was very unbounded, actually, and that we didn't have a church building. So we met in homes, and we were inviting people from the community to come into our houses to worship and to be together and be in community together, which is a wonderful idea, because it sort of gives people an experience of family that hopefully is something that they might never have experienced, and really wonderful in that way. But of course it caused loads of problems as well, because you get all the family dynamics being played out, and all the different family systems that everyone's bringing flying around in the ether. And we were just thinking, what we really need is, we do need a space where people can come, where people can feel like they belong, do some group work, because we recognize that actually people grow and develop best in a group that accepts them and helps them feel like they belong. And it all had to be done incredibly in a way where there was an open door. So, you know, people chose to come in as well. So a bit different from the statutory services, where it was sort of like all about choice, giving people choice to do or not to do, and activities. I mean, all of these things are really important, and playfulness is massively important for people to have a space where they can have a laugh, and it's not all deadly serious, and that they can come and kind of, if they're really super stressed, they can come in and offload and then sit down and play a game or something. I mean, these sound like little things, but they're not. They're big things in terms of helping somebody down-regulate enough to relate to the person next to them, and then they can start to support one another as a community. So that's what we were trying to create. And we recognize the weakness in the church structure is that if you go to church and it's a church service, there's all sorts of problems, really, because you can't scream and shout, you can't yell, you can't throw things, you're not allowed. You have to conform. There's structure, which can be very containing and helpful, but it doesn't necessarily provide a space in which people can really get to know each other and support one another. So yeah, we were trying to kind of bring back the more community-based types of church that can contain and carry members of the community even when they're in distress.
It sounds fascinating, but it sounds as if it wasn't just the church that there was lacking, but statutory services were as well. So you were obviously having to fill some of the gaps in the statutory services.
Well, I mean, this is the problem, I think, is that, you know, we have this revolving door thing going on, which I think happens in all sorts of different services. And I was working in the hospitals, so I was seeing the same people come back again, and, you know, over the 7 years that I worked there, it was like they'd come in for 6 months, be really ill, and then they get better, and then they go back out into the community, and then 6 months later they come back in again, and then on talking to them and sort of seeing what was happening, there was a sense of had certain things been in place, they might not have spiraled back to the extent with their mental health in order to be, you know, sectioned into onto the wards, and most of it was isolation, you know. And I remember one person I was chatting to in the canteen. She was eating her apple, and she just said, Karen, we're the forgotten ones, and she munched on her apple, and that really struck me as she ate her apple, and I was sitting there with her in the canteen, and I thought, yeah, you're right, nobody really remembers you until you're back in the ward, and then it's like, oh, it's you again. But out in the community, lost. There's no space, and particularly for those folk who get very depressed and isolate themselves in their flats. So yeah, so I think the statutory services are obviously hugely stretched, but they work on a medical model, and the medical model is really about medicating. It's about giving the person the right treatment in terms of medicine, perhaps a little bit of therapeutic treatment on the side, if you're lucky, but that's never the priority. And then you get better and you're put back out in the community. But actually what folk really need is support. And it's hugely missing, partly because of the nature of the mental illnesses is people often push away support or hide away from support when they're not very well. So yes, if we could establish a community which is always there and is always welcoming, and you try and get people involved in the community when they're feeling well enough, not when they're too ill, but they need to be feeling well. And then when they start to get ill, you then have that support network that perhaps could help de-escalate and allow somebody to remain out of hospital or out of prison or whatever's going to happen, or off the streets, as it were.
Thank you.
And do you think that being part of the faith-based community meant that the projects could cater for needs that couldn't be met by non-faith-based services?
I mean, that's an interesting question, because I don't think you have to be a person of faith to set up a project that can meet the needs of people. However, I think that, and there's more awareness now of the usefulness of things like meditation and mindfulness and spirituality and rootedness, and how important it is for people to have those aspects kind of in their life. So I think that's what faith communities can offer, is they offer a narrative that's ancient, which can be hugely helpful for people that perhaps don't quite know where they've come from, and then they can be invited to come and join into something which has all sorts of metaphors, stories, deep meaning, that type of thing. So I think faith-based communities can offer that, but other communities could as well. They just need to figure out how to do it. I suppose the church has been doing it for centuries and so knows how to do it. I mean, it's basic things like singing songs together that tell stories. That's hugely rooting and calming and connecting. And particularly the Christian church does that really, really well. But meditation, and it doesn't have to be Christian at all. I mean, the Buddhist traditions are really popular now because people recognize actually it's really soothing and calming to meditate every day. So these type of activities are very, very beneficial for mental health, and I think the church has an ancient tradition of them, and other religions do too, and they're really helpful. And could be used a lot more in providing people space to regulate, contemplate, prayer, meditation, whatever practice feels helpful and beneficial.
Talking, I was wondering as well about whether faith-based communities can play an important role in terms of identity, because I think often people with mental health problems end up with an identity that's really formed around what they can't do or about their struggles, and wondering whether religion might give people a different aspect to their identity that could offer them something positive beyond some of their other identities.
I think absolutely it can. I think religion at its best is providing people with a historic narrative that they can be a part of, which is hugely meaningful, and belonging to a bunch of people that have a hope, belonging to an organisation which is built around perceiving all human beings as being, good. I mean, obviously it depends on your theology around here, but there's something about acceptance and fresh starts. I think pretty much all the religions are about, growth and development and renewal, and giving everyone a second chance and all of that sort of thing. The best religions, the best bits of religion have all of that a part of it. And that's incredibly liberating for somebody who's had a life script of being told they're bad, they're wrong, they're evil, all of that type of thing. I mean, obviously it does depend on the theology that's coming out of it. I mean, the Christian church has some terrible theology, which has caused huge problems. And I'm not advocating that. I think we need to get rid of that, because that's not going to help people at all. But I think the core of if you look at the core basis of most faiths, that it's built on encouraging human beings to flourish, and that's wonderful.
Thank you. And changing tack slightly, you've subsequently trained as an art therapist. Why did you decide to train in this therapeutic modality as opposed to another model of therapy?
Well, I think it was very personal in that I've always been a creative soul, and I think what I did was I decided that I needed to do more creativity, do more artwork, and so I did a year foundation course in art therapy, just because I thought, well, it would help me start making art again, and that's kind of how I got into it, and then I realised that actually this was definitely where I was meant to head anyway. And I think the arts, going back to this idea of boundaries and containment, the arts provide an extraordinary way in which we can look at some of our greatest fears and some of our biggest shadows in a way that's contained, that's safe, that we can begin to be curious about. And I think that can then allow our inner worlds to be seen and witnessed, valued, appreciated, and we can begin to be compassionate towards ourselves, I think, using the arts in a way that talking therapies I don't think can quite get there in the same way. And it's purely to do with the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and how the arts just tap straight into that right hemisphere, where the emotions are all kind of activated. And it's extraordinary how the unconscious can reveal itself so dramatically and beautifully just with an image. So I fell in love with it when I did the foundation year and carried on to do a master's, and then realized that actually having trained as a psychotherapist, I can actually do the work that I always really wanted to do with folk, very contained, very creative, and just being in a room with somebody talking about meaningful things is a wonderful privilege. So yes, I feel like I've landed finally into a career that matches my desires to be connected with human beings in a deep way. So yeah.
How do you think your initial role as a religious minister has strengthened your what you bring as an art therapist? Because presumably you do that job, that role, in a slightly different way than someone who perhaps doesn't have that background.
I think it's like anything, really. I think I find that people have permission to talk about their spirituality with me, whereas they might be a little bit anxious with somebody that perhaps doesn't have a background in faith. So it opens the field out, and I'm somebody who is very curious about how we connect with one another in a way that we don't understand, which I think is what religion's all about, really, is trying to kind of put religious language to it, don't we? But we need to feel deeply connected to one another and to the earth and to the universe somehow, and that always comes out really in the work. There's something very existential about therapeutic work, and the arts as well. There's always that existential arm of the unknown and the mysteries and our greatest fears, perhaps lodged in death and life and what is meaning and who we are. So I think having knowledge of faith communities of different, I worked interfaith as well for a long period of time, has opened me up to be very curious and very happy to listen to people's own understanding and view of the world, whether it be from a point of not believing there's anything beyond the here and now, to people of all sorts of different faiths. And I think the therapy space should be a space where we can talk about these things and explore and be curious and expand our minds. Yeah, so I think my background does help, and a number of folk deliberately come to see me because I'm a person of faith, and they know they can talk freely about their beliefs without feeling like they're going to be told they're delusional or something like that.
You're also co-chair of the biannual conference Continuing the Journey, which provides continued professional development to people who are therapists and spiritual leaders. But why was there a need for this conference?
Well, this conference has been going on for quite a number of years now. I think it was set up in 1986. And the history of the relationship between, particularly in this country, the Christian church and the counselling world has been a bit rocky, really. They didn't used to talk to one another very much. You know, the Christians were very wary of the Freudian analysts that saw phallic symbols everywhere and thought that was terrible. And the analysts hated the Christians because they were believing in something that was ridiculous and not helping people at all in terms of delusional sort of ways of thinking. And so these two worlds kind of lived quite separate lives, I think. And then there were some psychotherapists and some church clergy people who got together and said that we need to start joining the dots here, because we're basically trying to achieve the same goals here. We're working towards human wholeness, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, development, growth. And the psychotherapy world has so much to offer the church, and the church has so much to offer the world of psychotherapy. Now, things have moved on a lot since 1986, I think, and the whole area of spirituality has been integrated a lot better into the world of psychotherapy. But the church seems to have a little way to go as well in terms of integrating some of the knowledge and the wealth of knowledge that's come through the psychology world. And so what this conference tries to do, every 2 years we all get together for 5 days. We have some amazing speakers, but really it's a mixture of clergy people and therapists. We talk, we discuss, we explore issues and themes that are incredibly relevant, I think, to today's society, in a way that uses the Christian scriptures and faith traditions, but also integrates the most contemporary kind of thoughts and thinking from the world of psychology. So it's fascinating, and every year, every time I go, it's like a little bit mind-blowing. Because it's just a wonderful combination that really works, and it's a journey. We tend to journey together as well, so people go back year in year to the conference, so it's like a little community that's formed over the years, and we get to know each other and support one another in our work together.
Sounds like it could be a valuable resource for somebody who draws on both philosophical learnings, really. So we'll include a link to that in our show notes for anyone who's interested in that. But part of your work has also involved trying to support schools in becoming more trauma informed. Can you tell us a bit about this work?
Yeah, more recently I've had the privilege of doing a bit of work for Trauma Informed Schools UK, which is an organisation founded by Margot Sunderland, who's the director of the Institute of Therapy and the Arts, and she's very passionate about the fact that if a child has at least one emotionally available adult in their lives, it can change the course of their life, change their trajectory significantly. And the research shows this, that a child can have to deal with some terrible stuff, really difficult things, but if they'd have one emotionally available adult who's there for them, then that can really help them in their development, and cause them to go on and live their life and negotiate life's obstacles. If they don't, however, we know that actually it means that this child's going to grow into an adult who's going to struggle in relationships, perhaps with addictions, struggle with anger management, potentially end up in prison. And there are, you know, the stories that I hear from the adults that I treat, you know, absolutely, this is all about the fact that they didn't have somebody with them to process something terrible that had happened to them. So trauma-informed schools is basically what it is, really. Is we're trying to create a little army of teachers who have the skills to be able to spot a child in distress and to be emotionally available for them and enable that child, hopefully, to be able to regulate. And I mean, it works with, we call it P in the 3 R's: protect, regulate, relate, and reflect. So the idea is we train teachers in the therapeutic art of enabling a human being to reflect. And if they can do that with a child in the school, and the schools become the only space sometimes that these children have that feel safe, and often schools don't feel safe for lots of reasons. So if that's the first thing, is to get the school feeling safe to protect the child, but then to enable the schools to help children develop that art of reflection, that reflective practice, so that as they go on to become adults and they have these awful feelings that come from adverse childhood experiences, that they're able to reflect on it and to regulate and to get the help they need when they need it. So that's the work we do. We run an 11-day training, like a diploma, which teachers come on. The training is run by a combination of a teacher and a therapist. We always try and combine the two, and they're a home group. So I'm very much involved in running the home group. So I sort of teach the teachers how to listen empathically, and we practice it together, and we do all of that sort of wonderful therapy training, I suppose, in that setting. But it's a really exciting project to be a part of, and we're so grateful for these teachers that are interested, and it's amazing because they come on the training and they say, why weren't we taught this when we were trained? And I'm like, I know you weren't, and you should be, but what a difference it would make, not just to the children, but actually to the teachers, because they don't know what to do. You have a child come in and throw chairs around in the classroom. They don't know how to deal with this child, whereas this training will really give them the tools to know how to manage and help that child regulate.
Is Margot Sunderland also an author? Because her name is it. I think has she written several books about emotions which I think are actually pitched at children, but I have used them with adults. There's one in particular, the name escapes me now, but there's one in particular about being macho and hiding your vulnerability with this macho shell on the outside. But they're really cleverly written, and in a way that actually I think even, I managed to get adult males interested in these books, where recognise that actually that's what their child parts needed when they were much younger.
Yeah, that's right. So she's written a number of books that are very useful, working with children and adults, and also some theory books as well, which are very much based around how using storytelling, the arts, creativity, giving that. Margot's all about helping children to put language to their emotions, and how important that is. That once we can begin to say, this is what's happening for me, then we can start to release that energy out of our system. And yeah, so she's got sort of wonderful resources which I use all the time, called emotion cards, which is a big set of cards. And you can get them for young children, teenagers, and then there's kind of basic ones you can use with adults. and they're brilliant because they're images and there are some words with them, but it's the images we work with. It's like pick the images that you can relate to here, and then we talk about the images and how what that evokes for the person, and they're a wonderful resource to have really in your toolkit. Again, it's putting language to words, which is so important in the art of reflection.
So perfect segue there, Karen, because somewhat unusually, you've also developed a card game called 20 Dreams. I think it's called 20 Dreams. Can you tell us about that and why you did that?
Yeah, 20 Dreams is an extraordinary outcome of lockdown. It's one of the projects we decided to do. My partner wanted to do something a little bit different and to try and see if we could start something from scratch, a little business project, as it were. And we were trying to rack our brains to think of what to do. We were sort of thinking about eco-friendly washing up brushes and all sorts of things like that. And then she said, "Oh, why don't we develop a game? You're good at games, Karen. Come on." And so I said,
pressure.
"Okay, then, no pressure." I said, "Okay." In those wonderful days where we had loads of time on our hands, and so we started trying to think up a concept that might work. And I've always loved games. I've loved all sorts of games. I've always been a game player. I like all the strategy ones. I love chess, I love Scrabble and all that sort of thing. But I've also always loved the creative games. Like, give me charades any day and I'll be well away. And I thought, gosh, can we create a game that sort of combines a little bit of both somehow, that feels like somebody who likes chess could play it, but also allows those people that hate the competitive strategy games to play something that they really enjoy. So that was kind of where I started thinking about using images and trying to have a game that really works the right hemisphere rather than the very strategic left hemisphere. And then I literally had a dream. So I dreamt, I was trying to problem solve what game we were going to have, and I had a dream about a game that was a game with images, and it talked about feelings, because of course dreams are all about feelings. So I woke up with the last night I had a dream, and I woke up feeling, and that's where the concept of the game came from. And then we started developing it, and the idea was to have images, so you create your own imaginary dream story, but the game is everybody has to guess what the feeling is behind the story. So you're not allowed to say the feeling. So it might be happy. You can't say I was happy. Not allowed to say the word happy, but everyone else, you tell the story, and everyone else has to say, well, the feeling of that story is happy. And then they all get points. So it's hilarious, it's ridiculous. And we've discovered as we played it actually with different people, it's a wonderful way of people getting to know each other. And it's also a game which actually young people can play just as well as old people. There's no sort of, doesn't matter how old you are, you'll still be able to do it, as long as you understand what the emotion word means. So you've got to be old enough to know what happy means to be able to play the game, really. So that's kind of where it emerged. And then we went for the challenge of doing a Kickstarter and raised some money and got the game actually produced, and it's now on the market, which is a real achievement, I think. But yeah, we're just going to see where it goes from now on, really. But I think the key thing about it that we realized is it's quite a unique game in that it does really play on the imagination as being the key part of what this game is all about, and also is asking people to think about feelings and emotions, which is very rare in the gaming world. So We think it's a bit unique. It might put people off a bit, but we're quite happy to have produced it and it's out there.
Sounds fascinating. Sounds as if it might require a degree of courage to play it, but I'm also thinking that anyone who's worked in forensics knows that one of the important tasks one has is helping people to identify feelings other than rage and distress. And it sounds as if this game could well have a part to play there.
Yeah, I think it really does. I mean, there are 20 emotions, and you don't get to choose what emotion you have to express. And so, yeah, it's quite interesting. If somebody doesn't have a wide emotional repertoire, they might need a little bit of help to know, what does surprise look like? They might tell a story where somebody bashes somebody else over the head with a stick, and everyone else is going, well, that's violent, isn't it? And they go, no, my name was surprised. And it gives you a way in which you can sort of, in a really light-hearted way, explore how we all experience emotions very differently, and we might have different words for it. So and it's great to be. I've got some other colleagues that use it quite regularly in their therapy sessions, just as a kind of icebreaker and as a bit of fun, but also to kind of get to know one another a little bit and explore the different emotional words and what that might look like in a story.
Thank you. So you mentioned the importance of play earlier on, I think. So do you think games are undervalued in terms of their ability to impact on mental health and emotional well-being?
Totally undervalued. I mean, I think obviously somebody needs to be regulated enough to be able to sit down and play a game, but actually games themselves are very regulating. And I think, we creating 20 Dreams has meant that we have come in contact with a lot of the gaming world. And I'm really respectful of them, actually. It's amazing, people that get involved in things like Dungeons and Dragons, or the strategy games, the role-playing games. What's happening there is it's a bit like church in a way, they're belonging to a society, a community that accepts them. They're able to use their imagination and their brains. It fully engages them. It's very calming and regulating. Sometimes they flip out if they lose, but there's always that element of it. But it's brilliant. And if you think about it, play is a natural way of us working out trauma. Children just do it normally, naturally on the playground. Things that distress them comes out in their play. And somehow we seem to forget to use it as adults. And I think it's very, very important for us to begin to reintegrate play into our lives. I mean, Brené Brown and her research clearly shows that people that she describes as wholesome people spend time playing. They potter and they play, which is basically an activity that doesn't really achieve much, but is enjoyable. And I think this is something we need to have in our everyday lives as much as possible, because we're too stressed pretty much all the time. And some of the guys I used to work in the community that were life sentences and they'd been released out. Honestly, playing Scrabble with them, I was going to lose, because playing Scrabble and chess in the prisons was one of their highlights and was incredibly important to them. I remember playing this one chap, he loved thrashing me. He was so brilliant. I thought I was good at Scrabble, but oh my goodness, he was amazing. And that's because he spent 18 years playing it with some of the brightest minds in our country. And and that was a wonderful thing to be able to play Scrabble with him. Unfortunately he's died now, but I'll always remember that game of Scrabble.
I think we probably all had those experiences of getting utterly thrashed at Scrabble and chess with people who spent a lot of time playing those activities. So Karen, you've worked with people during some of the darkest moments of their lives, and I imagine your faith has been a source of nourishment during that time, but wondered if there are any other things you practice that keep you emotionally healthy.
I'm always wondering that as well. what more can I do to keep myself emotionally healthy? What do I do? Well, this summer I've been swimming. I think that's a wonderful activity. Open in the reservoir, so open water swimming, and that's incredibly good for my system. I seem to just feel better because of it, and I think a lot of people say that. I've been doing pottery, which is a new activity that I absolutely adore, and I can't tell you what it's like working with clay. It's something very grounding, and I think it's connected to biophilia. It's that sense of being in nature, with nature, one with nature. And when you work with clay, you're working with the earth, and it responds in a very organic way. And I find that incredibly calming and soothing and exciting as well, particularly when you glaze it and you don't know what it's going to come out looking like. It's very exciting. So those types of activities are hugely important for me. But as always, relating, socializing, meeting with friends. Food is incredibly important for me to eat well and healthily, and just those basic things really. And I confess, I play at the moment. I'm a little bit addicted to playing a game on my phone, where I empty colored water into test tubes and have to sort all the colors out. So sorting games I find incredibly therapeutic. In between clients, I can think about the client, and then I'm doing this, and it's very calming. So those types of games I think I find really helpful at the moment.
Thanks very much, Karen. Been good to chat with you today.
It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you.